My daughter-in-law slammed a stack of fabricated bank statements onto the table, screaming that I had gambled away every cent of my retirement. My son didn't ask a single question. He believed her. And if we were going to stop Claire, we needed to know everything about the man who was helping her plan my death. What he didn't know was that in that moment he had just cast out the only man who could save his company. 1 year later, drowning in a $2, $7 million debt, he walked into the boardroom of Bancroft Capital, begging the chairman for help. The door closed softly behind him. I slowly turned the leather chair around, and he froze, realizing the gambling addict he threw out was the man now holding his entire future in his hands. Hello everyone and welcome. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, telling me where you're tuning in from. And if this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. A quick note: this narrative contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is unintentional, but the lessons within, those are worth your time. I'm 60 years old now, and I've learned that memory is a funny thing. It softens the edges, but some moments stay sharp. The smell of burnt pancakes on a Tuesday morning, the sound of a baseball bat in the backyard, the weight of a 10-year-old boy crying in your arms because he doesn't understand why his mother isn't coming home. That house on Elm Street feels like another lifetime now. Number 2, 1847, a 2-story colonial with white siding and blue shutters that my wife picked out because she said they reminded her of the sky on a clear day. She had a way of finding beauty in simple things. Jordan got that from her, the optimism, the light. He was 10 that year, small for his age, with a mop of blonde hair that never stayed combed and eyes the exact shade of hazel as his mother's. Sometimes when he looked at me with that crooked half smile, I'd forget for a second that she was gone. Then reality would crash back in. The backyard was his favorite place. We had a chain-link fence that needed fixing, grass that grew too fast in summer, and an elm tree that dropped helicopters everywhere each fall. Jordan would spend hours out there with his baseball bat, a hand-me-down Louisville Slugger slightly too big for him. He'd toss the ball up and swing missing more often than not, but he never gave up. I'd watch from the kitchen window while doing dishes, thinking about how resilient kids are. My wife died in March, lung cancer stage 4 by the time they caught it. The hospice nurse used words like comfortable and surrounded by family. But all I remember is the sound of Jordan's breathing in the chair next to me, too fast and too shallow, like he was trying not to cry and failing. The funeral was on a Thursday. Jordan wore his Sunday clothes and didn't say a word the entire time. People kept touching his head, telling him to be strong. He was 10 years old. He shouldn't have had to be strong. That first night home was the hardest. The house felt too quiet without her humming in the kitchen, without the click of her knitting needles, without her voice calling upstairs to tell Jordan it was bedtime. I found him sitting at the top of the staircase at 11 o'clock, still in his funeral clothes, staring at the closed door to our bedroom. I sat down next to him. The stairs creaked the same creak they had made for 15 years, but somehow it sounded different that night. Lonelier. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Who's going to take care of us now? His voice was so small, so scared. I realized he wasn't just asking about laundry and dinner. He was asking if we were going to be okay, if I was enough. I pulled him into my arms and held him tight. I will. I'll take care of you. Always. He cried then, really cried, the kind of sobbing that shakes your whole body. I let him. I held him and didn't tell him to stop or be brave. I just let him be a kid who'd lost his mom. Eventually he fell asleep right there on the stairs. I carried him to his bed, tucked him in with the baseball-themed comforter his mother had bought him, and stood in his doorway for a long time, just watching him breathe. The next morning, I tried to make pancakes. His mother made them every Saturday, perfect golden circles with crispy edges. I'd watched her do it 100 times. How hard could it be? Very hard, as it turned out. I burned the first batch so badly that smoke filled the kitchen and set off the alarm. Jordan came running downstairs in his pajamas, eyes wide with panic. When the noise finally cut out, we both just stood there in the smoky kitchen, staring at the charred mess. Then Jordan started laughing. Really laughing from his belly, I started laughing too. We laughed until we had to sit down on the kitchen floor, until my sides hurt, until everything felt just a little bit less impossible. "We're gonna be okay," I told him. "We're a team now, you and me, deal. Osterst, in die Mayamdi de Sastarver." He held out his hand small and sticky with syrup. "Deal." I shook his hand like he was a grown man, firm grip, eye contact. He grinned, and for the first time since his mother died, I thought maybe I could do this. Over the next few years, I learned to cook more than burnt pancakes. I learned to check homework, to remember which days were gym class, to sign permission slips. I also learned to teach him things my father had taught me: how to change a tire, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to shake hands properly and look someone in the eye. One afternoon when he was 13, his bike got a flat tire. He came in, threw his backpack down, and announced he needed a new bike because this one was broken. I looked up from the bills. "What's wrong with it?" "Oh, flat tire, rusty chain. It's old, Dad. Just get me a new one." I could have done it. I had the money by then. But something about the entitlement in his voice made me pause. "Come with me," I said. We went to the garage. I pulled out my old toolbox and showed him how to take the wheel off, find the leak patch it, and pump it back up. Then we tackled the chain, scrubbing off rust and applying fresh grease until it ran smooth. It took 2 hours. His hands got dirty. He complained that his friends didn't have to fix their own bikes, but when we were done and he rode it around the driveway, he had this look on his face. Pride, satisfaction. "Why didn't you just buy me a new bike?" he asked out of breath. I wiped grease off my hands. Because fixing something broken teaches you that not everything is disposable. Things have value beyond what they cost. People do too. He nodded like he understood. I thought he did. I really did. Looking back now, sitting here at 60 with everything I've lost, I can see that moment so clearly. My son, 13 years old, sitting on his newly repaired bike in the driveway, the late afternoon sun turning his hair gold. His mother's eyes looking back at me with something like understanding. I thought I was teaching him to be strong, to be kind, to understand that character matters more than money, that loyalty matters more than convenience, that you don't throw people away when they become difficult or broken. I thought those lessons would last forever. I was wrong. That promise I made him on the stairs the night his mother died, that we were a team, that it would be us against the world, that promise would be shattered 25 years later by a lie so simple, so devastating that it would cost me everything. My son, my dignity, my freedom, nearly my life. I built my fortune in silence under a name most people would never connect to me. By the time Jordan turned 18 and started looking at colleges, I had already made my first 10 million. By the time he graduated with a degree in architecture and construction management, I'd tripled that. And by the time he came to me asking for a loan to start his own company, I was sitting on a portfolio worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. He had no idea. The decision to keep it from him wasn't about shame or secrecy. It was about giving him something I never had growing up: the freedom to fail, to succeed on his own terms, to build something with his own hands and know he earned it. My father had been a factory worker in Detroit. Good man, hard worker, but he spent his whole life breaking his back for someone else's dream. When he died at 53, his pension barely covered the funeral. I swore I'd do better. I wanted to give Jordan a foundation, but I also wanted him to know what it felt like to stand on his own 2 feet. So in 2000, when Jordan was still in middle school, I founded Bancroft Capital Partners. The name was my mother's maiden name, a piece of family history that wouldn't raise flags. I filed everything under S.K. Bancroft, kept my photo off the website, conducted business through proxies, and let lawyers handle anything requiring a signature. Norman Blake, an old college buddy in corporate law, helped me set up the structure. He thought I was crazy. "You're sitting on a gold mine and you're driving a 15-year-old Camry," he said over the papers. "Your kid wears hand-me-down sneakers. What's the point of being rich if you live like you're broke?" Jordan doesn't need to know I'm rich. He needs to know he can make it on his own. The money's for security, not for show. Norman shook his head but signed the papers. "You're either the smartest man I know or the most paranoid." The truth was simpler. I'd seen what money did to people, How it made them soft, made them think they were special just because their bank accounts had extra zeros. I didn't want that for Jordan. I wanted him to understand that your worth as a person had nothing to do with your net worth. So I kept living in the house on Elm Street, kept driving the Camry until the transmission gave out, then bought a used Honda. The neighbors thought I was a retired financial advisor living on a modest pension. They weren't entirely wrong. I just left out the part about the private equity fund quietly buying up commercial real estate across 3 states. Jordan grew up normal. He had a paper route in middle school. He worked as a busboy at Applebee's during high school summers. He applied for scholarships because he assumed he had to. I could have written a check for his full tuition without blinking, but I didn't. I co-signed his student loans and watched him stress over job applications like any other graduate. When he walked across that stage to get his diploma, I was sitting in the audience in a sport coat from JCPenney, and I felt more pride than any amount of money could buy. 3 months later, he came to me with a business plan printed and bound. He had been working as a junior draftsman and had seen an opportunity: small-scale residential development, renovating old properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. He had the vision. He just needed capital. How much? I asked, flipping through his projections. They were good, ambitious but realistic. 50,000, he said. I'll pay you back with interest. I'll write you a check, I said. But Jordan, this is a loan. You pay me back same as a bank. We draw up papers, set terms, and stick to them. I'm your father, but this is business. His face got serious. I understand. We shook hands across the kitchen table. I could have given him $5 million. Could have set him up with a whole development portfolio, but I didn't. I gave him exactly what he asked for. He paid me back in 4 years, early, with interest. I've never been prouder. By 2015, Kensington Development was small but solid. Jordan had built a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. He had 6 employees, a small office, and enough projects lined up to stay busy for 2 years. He was doing it, on his own. Exactly like I'd hoped. That's when he met Claire. It was at a networking event downtown. Jordan had invited me. I usually found an excuse not to go, but that night I said yes, maybe instinct. Maybe the universe trying to give me a warning I was too stubborn to hear. She was standing by the bar when we walked in. Claire Hughes, 27 years old, dark hair pulled back in a complicated twist, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Beautiful in that polished, untouchable way that makes men stupid. Jordan's face lit up when he saw her. Dad, come here. I want you to meet someone. She smiled when we approached. Perfect teeth, perfect posture, perfect handshake. Dad, this is Claire, Jordan said, and I could hear something new in his voice, something that made my chest tighten. Her family owns Hughes Manufacturing. Claire, this is my father, Stuart. It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Kensington. Her voice was warm, friendly, but there was something in her eyes, something calculating that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Call me Stuart, I said. What do you do at Hughes Manufacturing? Oh, I'm just in marketing. Nothing as impressive as what Jordan's doing. Starting your own company takes real courage. She turned her attention back to Jordan, her whole demeanor changing, softer, warmer. Jordan ate it up. What do you do, Stuart? She asked the question, almost an afterthought. I'm retired, I said. Used to work in finance. Something flickered across her face. Disappointment, maybe. Or calculation. Oh, that's nice. I stood there with my cheap wine and watched my son fall for someone I instinctively didn't trust. I should have said something. Should have pulled him aside and told him to be careful. But I didn't. Because he looked happy. Really happy for the first time since his mother died. And I'd promised myself I'd do anything to keep that smile on his face. So I kept my mouth shut. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe this woman could make my son happy. I should have listened to my gut. I had no idea she'd spend the next year working her way into his life, into his business, into his head, until he couldn't tell the difference between her voice and his own thoughts. And I had no idea that by the time I figured out what she really wanted, it would already be too late. March 2023. That's when Claire discovered who I really was. and when she did, everything changed. I was 60 years old, living in the same house on Elm Street, still driving a sensible sedan, still keeping my business quiet. Jordan had been married to Claire for 4 years. 4 years of Sunday dinners and me biting my tongue every time I caught that calculating look in her eyes. The dinner at her parents' house started innocently enough. Gerald and Karen Hughes lived in one of those sprawling colonials with a 3-car garage and professionally landscaped grounds. Jordan had invited me, said Claire's family wanted to get to know me better. I should have said no. Gerald Hughes was holding court at the dining table, glass of scotch in hand, telling some story about the early days of Hughes manufacturing. I was halfway through my pot roast when his story took an unexpected turn. March of 2009, he said. We were 2 weeks from bankruptcy. The housing crisis had killed our contracts. Banks wouldn't touch us, and I was looking at laying off 130 people. I'd given up. Karen squeezed his hand. Tell them about the call. I got a call on a Tuesday afternoon. Man introduces himself as a representative from Bancroft Capital Partners. Says they've reviewed our financials and see potential. 3 days later, a guy named S.K. Bancroft wires $8 million into our account. Didn't ask for majority control, just gave us the runway we needed to survive. He raised his glass. I'll never forget that man. S.K. Bancroft from Bancroft Capital. We owe him everything. I kept my face neutral cut, another piece of pot roast chewed slowly. Across the table, I saw Claire's expression shift, just for a second. Something sharp and focused crossed her features before the pleasant smile slid back into place. The conversation moved on, but I noticed Claire had gone quiet. When I caught her eye, she was looking at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I went home that night with a bad feeling in my gut. What I didn't know was that the moment I left, Claire went straight to her laptop. I found out later from Evan's investigation exactly what she did. She typed SK, Bancroft Capital, into Google, found an article from 2010, found a photo from an industry conference, grainy, but clear enough. A man in a dark suit shaking hands with a developer. The caption read, S.K. Bancroft, founder and chairman of Bancroft Capital Partners. The man in the photo was me, the retired finance worker who drove a 10-year-old Honda, the father-in-law who lived in a modest house and wore JCPenney sport coats, the man she'd written off as insignificant 4 years ago. She must have spent hours that night pulling up every piece of public information she could find. Bancroft Capital's portfolio, property holdings, investment history, somewhere between $300 and $400 million in assets, and I controlled 60% of it. Jordan was my only child, my only heir. She had married a man she thought was a small-time developer. She'd just discovered she'd married the son of one of the wealthiest men in the region. I learned later that Claire spent the next week digging deeper. She found the trust documents, the corporate structure, the legal barriers I'd built to protect Jordan. She realized that as long as I was alive, as long as Jordan and I had a relationship, she had no claim to any of it. If Jordan inherited while they were married, she'd have access. But if they divorced first, she'd get nothing. But Claire wasn't impulsive. Wealth like that required precision. If she acted too quickly, I could change my will overnight, or worse, tell Jordan the truth before she secured her position. She needed to isolate him first, slowly, carefully, so that when she moved there would be no way back. The solution was simple. She needed Jordan to cut me out of his life, completely, permanently, before I changed my will, before I told Jordan the truth. She had 6 months to plan. While she was planning, I was dealing with my own problems. The pain started in my hands, a dull, persistent ache that I ignored for weeks. Then it got worse. Sharp stabbing agony every time I tried to grip a pen or turn a doorknob. My knuckles swelled up. My fingers stopped bending properly, curling inward like claws I couldn't straighten. The doctor's diagnosis was clinical and final. Arthritis, degenerative osteoarthritis, progressive condition, no cure. We can manage the pain, slow the progression maybe, but you're looking at diminishing mobility in your hands over the next few years. I was 60 years old and my hands were failing me. The same hands that had raised Jordan, taught him to fix his bike, built a business empire nobody knew existed. I called Jordan on a Sunday afternoon. "Hey, son, I might need some help with a few things around the house. My hands aren't working like they used to." "Of course, Dad. What's wrong with your hands?" "Arthritis. Doctor says it's normal for my age, but it's making some things difficult. Maybe come by this weekend, help me fix that leaky faucet." And lapon beco si spizorin. "He'll be there Saturday morning," he promised. I hung up feeling relieved. My son still cared. Whatever distance Claire had been trying to create hadn't worked. Not yet. What I didn't know was that Claire had been standing in the doorway listening to every word. I didn't know she was watching me the way a predator watches injured prey. I didn't know that in her mind my weakness was an opportunity, a vulnerability she could exploit. She spent those 6 months watching Waiting gathering details she could twist. Every time Jordan mentioned me, she filed it away. She built her case like a prosecutor preparing for trial, and I had no idea I was the defendant. March turned to April, April to May. My hands got worse. I started dropping things, coffee mugs, books, my phone. Simple tasks became humiliating struggles. Buttoning a shirt, tying my shoes, opening a bottle of pills. I was 60 years old, and I needed help with things a child could do. Jordan came by most weekends. Sometimes Claire came with him, all smiles and helpful suggestions, bringing casseroles I didn't ask for, and offering to organize my paperwork in ways that would have given her access to documents she had no business seeing. I always said no, always kept the important stuff locked away. But she was patient. She could wait. By September, she was ready. I was alone in my bedroom one night when I caught sight of the photo on my dresser. Jordan at 10, with his baseball bat grinning at the camera, his mother's eyes looking back at me across the years. I picked it up even though my hands ached and studied his face. So happy. So sure that his father would always be there to protect him. I had no idea that in less than a week, my son would look at me with hatred instead of love. That he'd believe a lie so simple, so perfectly calculated, that it would cost me everything. My relationship with him, my dignity, my freedom, nearly my life. She had 6 months to plan. In September 2023, she made her move. And when she did, it destroyed everything I'd spent 60 years building. 6 months after discovering who I really was in September 2023, Claire made her move. The lie was simple, but devastatingly effective. I found out later through Evan's investigation exactly how it happened. Jordan came home from work on a Thursday evening, tired from dealing with permit delays and difficult subcontractors. He walked in expecting the usual routine, dinner warming, Claire asking about his day. Instead, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, mascara smudged under her eyes, a crumpled tissue in her hand. The performance was perfect. I've seen the security footage Evan pulled from their doorbell camera. She'd been sitting there for at least 20 minutes, timing it perfectly. Honey, what's wrong?" Jordan dropped his briefcase cross to her in 3 quick steps. Concerned, caring, exactly the reaction she had counted on. She looked up with tear-filled eyes and delivered the killing blow. "I didn't want to tell you this, but I can't keep it from you anymore." "Tell me what—" She took a shaking breath. "It's about your father, Jordan. I found some things, bank statements, collection letters. I wasn't snooping. He just left them out when I was helping him organize his office last month, and I—" "Claire, what are you talking about?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Your father's retirement savings. He gambled it all away, or lost it to debts. The bank statements show withdrawals to online gambling sites, cash advances on maxed-out credit cards. He's broke Jordan. And now he's faking this whole arthritis thing, so we'll be stuck taking care of him for the rest of our lives." I can imagine the look on Jordan's face. Shock, disbelief, his whole world tilting sideways. Because a really good lie has just enough detail to feel real. Online gambling, credit card debt, things that happen to ordinary people, things that make sense. What number Dad would never... "I have proof." She handed him a folder. Inside were bank statements that looked real enough to pass casual inspection. Account numbers, transaction dates, withdrawals to sites with casino-related names, all carefully fabricated using Photoshop and publicly available templates, all designed to make my son hate me. Jordan stared at the papers, his face going pale. I know my son. I know how his mind works. He was probably thinking about all the times I'd asked for help around the house. Through Claire's lens, it all looked suspicious, calculated, like I'd been setting him up. I should call the bank, he said finally. Check his accounts. This was the moment, the pivot point where everything could have gone differently. If Jordan had made that call, he would have found out I had no gambling debts, no maxed out credit cards, no financial problems at all. But Claire was ready. Honey, no. Her voice went soft, urgent, tears still glistening. Your father begged me not to tell you. He said he'd handle it. He made me promise. If you call the bank, he'll know I broke his confidence. He'll be humiliated. Please just let him come to you when he's ready. He's your father. He has pride. Don't take that away from him. Jordan hesitated, torn between suspicion and respect, between checking the facts and respecting what he thought were my wishes. But do you really want to embarrass him like that? Spesiers. Anything scores. And that was it. That was the hook that caught him. Because Jordan was a good son, a kind son. The kind of person who would rather be taken advantage of than hurt someone he loved. Claire knew that about him. Knew it and used it like a weapon. You're right, he said quietly. I'll wait for him to tell me. She'd won. The next day, Friday afternoon, Jordan showed up at my door. I was in the garage trying to fix a lawnmower. My hands were aching, making it difficult to grip the wrench, but I was managing. I heard his truck pull in and felt a surge of happiness. I walked to the front door, wiping grease off my hands. Jordan, I didn't know you were coming. Come in, I just made coffee. His face stopped me cold. No smile, no warmth, just cold, flat anger. Did you gamble away your retirement savings? The question hit me like a fist. What, no, where did you hear that? Claire showed me the bank statements, the debts, everything. Son, I don't have any debts. I don't gamble. Claire is lying. Don't you dare call my wife a liar. His voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I could have told him right then. Could have said the words that would have blown Claire's story apart. Jordan, I'm not broke. I'm S.K. Bancroft. I have $300 million. Your wife is trying to steal your inheritance. But even as the words formed in my mind, I knew how they'd sound. Desperate, defensive. Like exactly what a cornered liar would say to deflect blame. He wouldn't have believed me anyway, not with Claire's fake evidence fresh in his mind. The truth needed proof, real proof. Bank records, corporate documents, something that couldn't be faked, and I didn't have any of that accessible. My important papers were in a safe deposit box downtown. My accountant was on vacation. So, I just stood there, grease still on my hands, arthritis making my fingers throb, and watched my son look at me like I was a stranger. You were my father? He said, his voice shaking. Now you're just a liar who tried to guilt-trip me into supporting your gambling addiction. Don't call me again. He turned and walked back to his truck, got in, slammed the door hard enough that I felt it in my chest, drove away without looking back. I stood in my doorway listening to his engine fade and felt something inside me break. Not my heart exactly. Something deeper, something fundamental. The belief that love and truth would always win in the end. I'd been wrong. I tried calling him that night. Straight to voicemail, tried again the next morning. Same thing. By Sunday, I realized he'd blocked my number. The silence was absolute, final. I sent an email Monday morning. Jordan, please let me explain. What Claire told you isn't true. I can prove it. Just give me a chance. It bounced back. He'd added my address to his spam filter. Claire must have been watching his phone, must have seen my attempts to reach him and helped him cut off every avenue of communication, making sure I couldn't tell my side of the story, making sure the lie had time to settle in his mind to become his truth. I sat alone in my house that week. The same house where I had raised him, where we'd burned pancakes and fixed bikes and made promises, and I understood what she'd done. She hadn't just lied to Jordan. She'd given him permission to abandon me, made him feel righteous about it, turned his love into anger, his loyalty into disgust. And I had no way to fight back, no way to prove my innocence, no way to reach my son through the wall she'd built between us. I lost him that day, not to death, not to distance, but to a lie, a simple, perfect lie that cost me everything. What came next, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. 2 months after Jordan walked out of my house, I woke up in the back of an ambulance with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My wrists were swollen to twice their normal size. My fingers were locked into claws I couldn't straighten. The arthritis had flared so badly that morning I'd collapsed trying to open a bottle of pain medication. The last thing I remembered was lying on my kitchen floor at 2847 Elm, the cordless phone just out of reach, and then nothing. When I came to, a paramedic was checking my pulse, and a woman in scrubs was saying something about medical intervention and family authorization. I tried to ask where I was going, but my tongue felt thick, my thoughts slow and blurred. Later, I'd learned I'd been given a sedative standard protocol, they said, for uncooperative patients during transport. The place they took me was called Meadowbrook Care Facility. The name sounded pastoral, but the building told a different story. It sat on the outer edge of the county, a squat 2-story structure with peeling beige paint and a chain-link fence. Inside, the air smelled like industrial bleach layered over something older and sourer, neglect maybe, or despair. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered. My room number 14B had a metal frame bed, a plastic chair, and a narrow window that looked out onto a parking lot. I didn't understand how I'd ended up there until a man in a white coat came to see me the next morning. His name was Dr. Richard Walsh, and he sat down in the plastic chair, opened a manila folder, and explained in a voice that was kind but oddly rehearsed that my daughter-in-law had filed paperwork indicating I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. There was a power of attorney document, he said, signed by me, granting Claire Hughes full authority over my medical and financial decisions. There was also a physician's report, one I'd never seen, stating that I suffered from severe cognitive decline and posed a danger to myself if left unsupervised. I tried to tell him it was a lie. I tried to explain that I'd never signed any such document, that my mind was as sharp as it had ever been, that the only thing wrong with me was arthritis. But, doctor, Walsh just nodded, made a note in his folder, and said, "I understand this is difficult, Mr. Kensington. The evaluation was based entirely on telehealth notes and reports provided by Claire. You were never given a second opinion. That was when I understood. Claire had forged the power of attorney. She'd fabricated the medical reports. She'd waited until I was sedated and defenseless, and then she'd had me committed to a facility with a reputation for looking the other way. Meadowbrook had been investigated twice in the past 5 years, once for medication errors, once for neglect that led to a patient's death. I didn't know it yet, but Claire had also canceled my health insurance. She'd frozen my bank accounts. She'd told the staff I was delusional and combative, that any attempt I made to contact the outside world should be ignored. She'd even bribed one of the night shift orderlies, a man named Marcus, to make sure I stayed isolated. $2,000 cash, in exchange for turning a blind eye to whatever happened in room 14B after dark. The first harm came 3 days after I arrived. I needed to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, but my joints were so stiff I could barely swing my legs off the bed. I pressed the call button. No one came. I pressed it again. Still nothing. Finally, I tried to make it on my own. I got as far as the bathroom doorway before my knees buckled and I went down hard on the tile floor. I lay there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, calling for help. No one came. Not Marcus, not the night nurse, not anyone. When the morning shift staff found me, they wrote it up as patient fell due to non-compliance with mobility restrictions. They didn't mention the unanswered call button. I tried to call Jordan. I tried 20 times over the next 2 weeks using the payphone in the hallway during the 15-minute windows when Marcus wasn't watching. Every call went straight to voicemail. Jordan had blocked my number. I wrote 5 letters, sealed them in envelopes I bought from another resident, and handed them to the front desk clerk with instructions to mail them to my son's office. All 5 came back stamped, "Return to sender." Claire, I later learned, had intercepted them. She'd told the staff I was writing threatening correspondence, and that any mail I sent should be confiscated for everyone's safety. I'd been at Meadowbrook for 2 weeks when Maggie O'Brien walked into my room. She was 45 years old, with red hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of face that made you think of someone's favorite Aunt Wide smile, bright eyes, the faint lilt of an Irish accent. She was a traveling nurse covering a 2-month contract, while Meadowbrook's regular staff dealt with a flu outbreak. She took one look at the bruise on my hip from the bathroom fall, at the unwashed sheets on my bed, at the tray of cold congealed food no one had bothered to take away, and she said, "This isn't right." I didn't say anything. I'd stopped expecting anyone to care. But Maggie came back the next day, and the day after that. She brought me clean blankets. She helped me sit up so I could eat without choking. She asked me questions, real questions, and she listened to the answers. One afternoon, as she was adjusting the pillow behind my back, she said, "You're not confused, are you, mister? Kensington, you're just stuck." I met her eyes. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something close to hope. "Yes," I said, "I'm stuck." She nodded slowly. "Then we'll figure out how to get you unstuck." I didn't believe her, not yet. But that night, lying in the narrow bed in room 14B, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, I let myself imagine just for a moment that maybe I wasn't entirely alone. That maybe there was still someone in the world who saw me as a human being, instead of an inconvenience or an obstacle or a problem to be solved. And in the hallway outside, Marcus leaned against the nurse's station, scrolling through his phone. The $2,000 Claire had given him already spent on a down payment for a used pickup truck. He didn't know that Maggie had started asking questions. He didn't know that in 6 months, his name would appear in a federal indictment alongside Claire's. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before any of that could happen, I had to survive. And survival, I was beginning to realize, was exactly what Claire had never intended. 20 calls, 5 letters, not a single answer. The payphone in the hallway at Meadowbrook had a cracked receiver and a coin slot that jammed every third try, but it was the only way I had to reach the outside world. I started calling Jordan in mid-December, a week after Maggie told me I wasn't confused, I was just stuck. I fed quarters into the slot and pressed the number I'd memorized 30 years ago. Every time the call went straight to voicemail. Every time I left a message. The first 5 calls in late December were careful. I kept my voice steady, my words measured. "Jordan, please," I said, gripping the receiver so hard my knuckles went white. "It's Dad. I need to talk to you. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Just call me back." I gave him the payphone number. I told him I'd be waiting every afternoon at 2 o'clock. I didn't say I was in a nursing home with peeling linoleum and a call button no one answered. I thought if I kept it simple, kept it calm, he'd listen. He didn't. By early January, the calls turned urgent. "Son, I'm at a care facility," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm not well. Please just hear me out." I explained that Claire had lied, that I'd never gambled a cent, that everything she had told him was fabricated. I asked him to check the bank statements himself, the old ones from before Claire. I told him I loved him. I told him I was sorry. Then I hung up and stood in that hallway staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It never did. Calls 6 through 10 were desperate. Calls 11 through 15 were angry. "Jordan, you owe me the basic respect of listening," I shouted one afternoon in late January, my voice echoing off the cinder block walls. A nurse walking past gave me a look that said I was proving Claire's point that I was unstable, unmanageable. I didn't care. I was furious. Furious at my son for believing a woman he'd known for 8 years over the father who'd raised him. By calls 16 through 20 in early February, I'd run out of anger. All that was left was exhaustion and grief. "I love you," I whispered into the phone. "Please don't forget that." I didn't leave my number anymore. I didn't ask him to call back. I just spoke into the void and hoped some part of him still remembered who I was. A week after the 20th call, I tried again and got a recorded message. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Jordan had blocked me, not just ignored me, erased me. I stopped using the payphone after that. But I didn't stop trying. I wrote letters, 5 of them over 2 months each one, drafted at the small plastic table in my room when the arthritis pain ebbed enough for me to grip a pen. My handwriting, once clean and precise, now looked like a child's scrawl, crooked lines, smudged ink letters that drifted off the page. The first letter, dated December 20th, was short. "Jordan, I need to explain. What Claire told you isn't true. Please call me." I sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to Jordan's office, and handed it to the front desk clerk with instructions to mail it. 2 weeks later, it came back stamped, "Return to sender." The second letter mailed January 5th was longer. I apologized. I swore I wasn't a gambler. I begged him to listen. It came back the same way. The third letter, dated January 15th, was the hardest to write. My hands were so stiff I had to soak them in warm water for 20 minutes before I could hold the pen. "Jordan, I'm begging you," I wrote. "Please listen. Whatever Claire said, it's not true. I can prove it. Just give me 5 minutes. Return to sender." The fourth letter, February 1st, included a photocopy of an old bank statement from 5 years earlier, showing a balance of $43,000 and no debts. "Look at this," I wrote. "I didn't have gambling losses. Trust me, son. Return to sender." The fifth letter, mailed February 10th, was the last. "If you can't forgive me, at least let me say goodbye. I miss you, son. Dad." It came back a week later. I held the envelope in my lap, staring at the red stamp, and I realized I wasn't crying anymore. I was just numb. Each return letter had felt like a knife. By the fifth one, I didn't have any feeling left. Around mid-February, I discovered that my prescriptions had been cut off. I went to the medication window one morning, and the nurse handed me a cup of water and nothing else. "Where's my arthritis medication?" She checked her computer. "Your insurance was canceled, Mr. Kensington. Your healthcare proxy, Mrs. Claire Kensington, canceled it. I didn't have any cash. Claire had frozen my bank accounts. I couldn't pay for so much as an aspirin. That night, the pain in my hands and knees was so bad I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., Maggie appeared in my doorway off shift, still in her street clothes with a small pill bottle in her hand. "Take 2 of these," she said quietly. "Don't tell anyone. I can't watch you suffer like this." I thanked her, my throat too tight to say more. 2 days later, Norman Blake walked into the Meadowbrook lobby and asked to see me. Norman was 65, a lawyer I'd known for 30 years, a man with silver hair and a reputation for being ruthless in court and loyal to his friends. He'd been trying to reach me since October, when I stopped responding to emails about Bancroft Capital's quarterly reports. When I didn't answer his calls for 2 months, he hired a private investigator. It took them 3 weeks to trace me to Meadowbrook. When he sat down across from me in the shabby visiting room, his face was tight with anger. "Stuart, what the hell happened? Who put you in this place?" I told him. Claire's lie, Jordan's rejection, the forged power of attorney, the block calls and return letters. Norman listened, jaw clenched, and then he reviewed the documents Claire had filed. When he came back, his expression was grim. "This is fraud, Stuart. We can sue. We can get you out of here and get your assets unfrozen." I shook my head. "I don't want to sue. I just want my son back." Norman leaned forward. "Then we'll get your son back. But first we need evidence. Hard evidence that Claire lied. And we need to move carefully, because if she realizes we're onto her, she'll cover her tracks." He paused, then put his hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, old friend. We'll fix this. I promise." For the first time in 2 months, I felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not quite. But it was close. 3 days later, Maggie pulled me aside in the hallway. Her face was pale. "Mr. Kensington, I overheard Marcus talking on his phone last night. He said something about making sure the old man doesn't cause trouble. I don't know what he meant, but you need to be careful." I nodded. I didn't tell her that I already knew Claire wasn't done with me. I didn't tell her that the worst was still ahead. Because some things you can feel in your bones long before they happen. And I could feel it like a storm building on the horizon, dark and unstoppable. But Claire wasn't done with me. The worst was still ahead. The fall wasn't an accident. I know that now. I didn't know it then, not in the moment when my foot slipped on the wet floor at the top of the second-floor staircase at Meadowbrook. Not when I reached for the railing with hands too stiff and swollen to grip anything. Not when I tumbled forward and the world flipped upside down. All I knew was the sensation of falling 8 concrete steps, each one a hard jolt against my ribs, my shoulder, my hip, and then the final sickening crack when my head hit the landing. After that, everything went dark. I woke up in the emergency room at County General with a splitting headache and a nurse shining a pen light into my eyes. The ceiling above me was white and too bright, and there was a steady beeping somewhere to my left that I couldn't place. My mouth tasted like copper. My body felt like it had been run over by a truck. When I tried to sit up, a hand pressed gently on my shoulder. "Easy, Mr. Kensington," a woman's voice said. "You've had a concussion. You need to stay still." It was Dr. Helen Morrison. I didn't know her name yet, but I'd learn it soon enough. She was 52 years old with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that didn't miss much. She stood at the foot of my bed, holding a clipboard, and she looked at me the way a detective might look at a crime scene, like she was trying to piece together what didn't add up. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked. I tried to remember. The physical therapy session on the second floor, the staircase, the wet floor, no warning sign, my foot slipping, the fall. "The floor was wet," I said, my voice hoarse. There wasn't any caution sign. I didn't see it until it was too late. Dr. Morrison made a note on her clipboard. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down next to me, which is when I knew this wasn't just a routine check-in. "Mr. Kensington," she said carefully, "I've been reviewing your medical records. Your arthritis medication was discontinued 3 weeks ago. Your health insurance was canceled around the same time. And there's no emergency contact listed in your file, not a single family member, not a friend, nothing. That's unusual." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "Is someone preventing you from receiving proper care?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her everything about Claire, about the forged power of attorney, about the blocked calls and the returned letters, and the nights I'd spent lying in that narrow bed at Meadowbrook, wondering if I'd wake up the next morning. But I didn't, because I knew how it would sound. "If I report this," I said slowly, "they'll say I'm senile. They'll say I'm making it up because I'm unhappy with the nursing home. And Claire, my daughter-in-law, she has all the paperwork, medical evaluations, legal documents, my son's signature on the admission forms. I don't have anything, just my word. Who's going to believe a sick old man over a concerned daughter-in-law?" Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward. "Okay," she said softly, "but promise me you'll be careful. And if anything else happens, you need to tell someone. Anyone. Do you understand?" I nodded. I didn't tell her that anything else had already happened multiple times. I didn't tell her that I was running out of time. She left, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. That's when Norman walked in. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, his face drawn and tired, and when he saw me in the hospital bed with a bandage wrapped around my head, he swore under his breath. "Stuart, this has to stop," he said, pulling up the chair Dr. Morrison had vacated. "She's trying to harm you, maybe worse." "I know," I said. "Then why haven't we called the police?" It was a fair question. Norman was a lawyer. His instinct was to go through the proper channels to file reports and build a case. But I'd already thought this through. "We can't," I said. "Not yet. Claire has forged documents that make her look like a devoted caregiver. If we go to the police now, it's my word against hers, and she'll bury me in legal procedures. We need evidence-first recordings, financial records, witness testimony, something ironclad." Norman sat back in his chair, his jaw tight. He knew I was right. "Fine," he said. "Then we gather evidence, but we do it fast because I'm not sure how much more of this you can take." Neither was I. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn until weeks later when my nephew Evan started digging into the details, was that Marcus, the night shift orderly at Meadowbrook, had been paid 3 separate times by an account linked to a man named Kyle Bennett. $2,000 in February, $1,500 in early March, and $3,000 the day after I fell down those stairs. Claire didn't leave her fingerprints on any of it, but Kyle did, and that trail, faint as it was, would eventually lead us to the full scope of what they had planned. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Lying in that hospital bed, with every breath sending sparks of pain through my ribs and the dull throb of the concussion pulsing behind my eyes, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting to die. I wasn't going to let Claire win. I was going to fight, and I was going to take my life back one piece at a time. Norman was watching me. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "If find my nephew," I said. "Evan. He's 29, works in Tech Lives about an hour from here. Tell him I need his help, and tell him to be discreet." Norman nodded. "What's he going to do?" "Whatever it takes," I said. "Evan's good with computers. He can dig up things most people wouldn't know where to look, and he's loyal. If I ask him to help, he will." Norman stood up, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "All right, I'll find him. You just focus on getting out of this place in one piece." After he left, I lay there in the dim light of the emergency room, listening to the beep of the monitor and the distant murmur of voices in the hallway. My hands were trembling from pain, from exhaustion, from the arthritis that never really went away, but I curled them into fists anyway. Every movement sent little jolts of discomfort shooting through my fingers, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger, and anger I realized could be fuel. I thought about Claire, about the lies she'd told and the life she'd stolen, about the son she'd turned against me and the institution she'd manipulated to keep me trapped. And I thought about the fact that she'd tried twice now, maybe 3 times, to make sure I never walked out of Meadowbrook alive. She'd underestimated me. She thought I was too old, too sick, too isolated to fight back. She was wrong. 2 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. Evan overheard a conversation he was never supposed to hear. 2 weeks after Norman left, with the promise to find my nephew, Evan, walk through the door of room 14B at Meadowbrook. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my brother's funeral, when Evan was barely out of college. Now he was 29, tall and lean with dark hair, and the kind of quiet intensity that reminded me of his father. He stood in the doorway, looking around at the peeling paint and narrow bed, and I could see anger tighten his jaw. "Uncle Stuart," he said, stepping inside. "It's been a while. I tried to sit up straighter, but my ribs were still sore from the fall and my hands ached. Evan, I haven't seen you in 4 years? 5, he corrected. He pulled the plastic chair over and sat down. Uncle Norman told me what's been happening, about Claire, about Jordan, about all of this. He gestured at the room. I'm here to help. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so many months feeling like I was drowning, and now here was this young man offering to throw me a line. I don't know what you can do. She's got all the paperwork, the forged power of attorney, the fake medical reports, and Jordan won't listen to me. Then we'll make him listen, Evan said. His voice was steady calm, but there was steel underneath. I work in finance. I know how to track money. If Claire's been moving your assets around, if she's been paying people off, I'll find it. He paused. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I looked at him, this nephew I barely knew, who had no reason to risk anything for me, and I nodded. Yes, I can do that. Over the next 2 weeks, Evan became a shadow. He followed Claire. He parked outside the house at 156 Thornwood and watched her come and go. He pulled financial records, mine, Jordan's, Claire's, and started piecing together where the money had gone and who had touched it. He talked to staff at Meadowbrook, asking casual questions about my care, about who had access to my room, and he waited. The break came on a late afternoon in mid-May. Claire showed up at Meadowbrook for one of her rare visits, part of her act, to make it look like she was a concerned daughter-in-law. I was asleep when she arrived. The nurse had given me a sedative earlier that day. I was vaguely aware of her voice in the hallway. Then the door to my room opened and closed, and I heard her footsteps fade down the corridor. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until the next morning, was that Evan had been there too. He'd been sitting in his car in the parking lot, watching the entrance when he saw Claire walk out. She didn't go to her car. Instead, she headed around the side of the building toward a bench near the first-floor windows and pulled out her phone. Evan followed, keeping to the edge of the lot, and crouched beneath the window closest to where she was standing. He took out his own phone, opened the voice recorder app, and hit record. Later, when he played the audio for me, I would hear every word. Claire's voice sharp and impatient. Kyle, this has taken too long. He's still alive. We need to speed this up. A man's voice, Kyle Bennett. I'd learned his name soon enough, replied, What do you have in mind? Ondi spikspo fridetiksto. I want to make sure he's out of the picture, Claire said. Permanently. Another accident he could fall again, or his condition could take a sudden turn. No one would question it. He's old, he's sick. What if someone does question it? Kyle asked. Who's going to question it, Jordan? He won't even talk to the old man, the nursing home staff. They're incompetent. We just need to be smart about this. There was a pause. Then Kyle said, "All right, I'll look into it, but this better be worth it." "It will be," Claire said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, cold and satisfied. "Once he's gone, Jordan inherits everything, and Jordan is mine." Evan told me later that his hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. He stayed crouched beneath that window until Claire ended the call and walked back to her car, and then he waited another 10 minutes before he got back in his own car. The next morning, he came to my room. I was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to coax some flexibility back into my hands. When Evan walked in, his face was pale and grim. "Uncle Stewart," he said quietly, "you're in danger. Real danger." I looked at him. "I know. I've known for a while." "No," he said. "You don't understand." He pulled out his phone, plugged in a small speaker, and hit play. I listened to the recording. All of it. Claire's voice talking about me like I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Kyle's voice clinical and detached, agreeing to help her. The casual way they discussed making my death look like an accident. When it was over, I sat there in silence. My hands were trembling not from arthritis this time, but from shock. "She wants me gone," I said, finally my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Evan said. "She does." I looked at him. "Do we have enough? Can we take this to the police?" Evan hesitated. "It's a start, but Uncle Norman thinks we need more. We need to show a pattern financial records witness statements, proof that she's been manipulating Jordan and isolating you. If we go to the police now with just this recording, she'll get a good lawyer and claim it was taken out of context. We need more." "Then what do we do?" I asked. "We protect you," Evan said. "Uncle Norman and I have a plan. We're going to move you out of Meadowbrook quietly to a safer place. We're going to keep gathering evidence, financial trails, witness testimony, everything. And when we have enough, we're going to bring it all to Jordan. We're going to make him see who Claire really is." "How long will that take?" I asked. 2 months, Evan said. "Maybe less, but you have to trust us, and you have to stay alive until we can pull this off." I nodded. I didn't have any other choice. Evan stood up, gripping my shoulder briefly. "You're not alone in this, Uncle Stewart. Not anymore." After he left, I sat on the edge of that narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and I realized something. I'd known Claire was cruel. I'd known she was manipulative. But hearing her plot to end my life, hearing her talk about me as if I were nothing but trash to be disposed of, had done something to me. The fear I'd carried for months, the despair that had weighed me down, had shifted. It had turned into something colder, sharper. It had turned into fury. Norman and Evan gave me 2 months. 2 months to survive, to gather evidence, and to prepare for the moment I'd take back everything Claire had stolen from me. Evan came to see me 2 days after I'd listened to that recording. He brought Norman with him, and together, the 3 of us began building a case. They arrived in the late afternoon, when the hallways at Meadowbrook were mostly empty and the staff was busy with the dinner shift. Evan carried a laptop in a black messenger bag, and Norman had a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 30 years of courtroom battles. They pulled the plastic chair and a folding stool into my room, closed the door, and Norman spread a stack of documents across the narrow bed. "All right," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Let's talk strategy." The plan had 3 parts. First, we needed to gather more evidence enough to prove not just that Claire had lied to Jordan, but that she'd committed fraud, manipulated financial records, and conspired with Kyle Bennett to harm me. The recording Evan had made was a start, but it wasn't enough on its own. We needed a paper trail. Second, we needed to keep me safe. Norman had already arranged for a retired cop to check in on me discreetly, and Maggie had agreed to keep an eye on my room during her shifts. Moving me out of Meadowbrook wasn't an option. If Claire realized I'd disappeared, she'd know something was wrong and cover her tracks. Better to let her think everything was going according to plan. Third and most important, we needed leverage. We needed something that would force Jordan to listen, to really listen, when the time came to confront him. "We need a moment when Jordan has no choice but to pay attention," Norman said. "Right now, he's convinced you're a liar and a gambler. We need to shatter that conviction." Evan leaned forward. "What if Jordan's company got into trouble? Real trouble. I've been looking at Kensington Development's finances. They're not great. Jordan's been leveraging debt to fund new projects, and a couple are behind schedule. If a major investor pulled out, or if one of those projects failed, the whole company could be in serious danger. Jordan would be desperate." Norman nodded slowly. "And desperate people make mistakes. They also listen better." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "Are you suggesting we sabotage my son's company?" "No," Norman said firmly. "We're suggesting we let things unfold naturally. If Jordan's business is already fragile, it's going to crack eventually. And when it does, when he's looking for a way out, when he needs capital or connections, you'll be there. As S.K. Bancroft." I sat back trying to process what they were saying. The idea of watching my son's company collapse felt wrong, but the alternative, letting Claire continue to manipulate him, continue to plot my death, felt worse. "All right," I said finally. "What do we need to do?" Evan opened his laptop. "First, we gather the rest of the evidence, and I think I know where to start." He explained it carefully. Claire had made a critical mistake. She'd been using the shared family laptop at Jordan's house to send some of her messages to Kyle Bennett. That laptop auto-saved passwords and kept a cloud backup of everything: emails, documents, browser history. Evan had provided tech support for Jordan a few months earlier when Jordan's work computer crashed. As part of that process, Evan had been given access credentials to the family cloud account. Claire had never thought to revoke that access. "Wait," I said. "So you're saying you can see her emails?" "Not hacking," Evan said quickly, glancing at Norman. "I'm accessing a shared family device I was previously authorized to support. It's completely legal." Norman leaned back, arms crossed. "We're not breaking any laws, are we, Evan?" "I'm sure, Uncle Norman. This is a shared device. I have authorized credentials. I'm just looking at what's already there." Norman nodded. "Then do it." Over the next 2 weeks, Evan combed through that backup, and what he found was damning. There were the fake emails Claire had created, messages supposedly from online gambling sites with my name attached. There were text exchanges between Claire and Kyle discussing not just their affair, but their plans to drain my assets once I was gone. There was a bank record showing that Claire had withdrawn $50,000 from an account in my name using the forged power of attorney. Norman took that record to a forensic document examiner, and she confirmed what we already knew: the signature on the POA was a forgery. Meanwhile, Maggie quietly pulled copies of my medical records from Meadowbrook, highlighting the gaps in care, the canceled prescriptions, the missed physical therapy sessions, the incident reports that had been written up and then ignored. Norman had also been working on unfreezing my bank accounts. With the forensic report proving the power of attorney was forged, he filed an emergency petition with the probate court. It took 3 weeks and a mountain of legal paperwork, but by early August I had access to my accounts again. Bancroft Capital was mine once more. The company's interim CEO had kept things running smoothly during my absence, and when I quietly resumed control through secure video calls from Norman's office, not a single board member questioned my authority. Claire had no idea. In the meantime, I had a role to play. I needed Claire to believe her plan was working, so I became weaker. Not in reality, Norman had arranged for me to get proper medication again, delivered discreetly by Maggie, but in appearance. When Claire came to visit, which she did once every couple of weeks to keep up the charade, I made sure I looked tired, frail, defeated. She came one afternoon in late August, dressed in a pale blue blouse and carrying a small bouquet of flowers she set on the windowsill, without putting them in water. "How are you feeling, Stuart?" she asked, her voice syrupy with false concern. I let my head rest against the pillow and closed my eyes halfway. "Not well, Claire," I said, my voice thin and hoarse. "Not well at all." She smiled just a flicker, but I saw it. "You just rest," she said softly. "It'll all be over soon." After she left, I lay there staring at the ceiling, my hands curled into fists beneath the blanket. She had no idea that every word she'd said, every visit she'd made was being documented. She thought she was winning, but the trap had already been set. All we needed now was for Jordan to step into it. Norman came to see me the next day. He sat in the plastic chair, his briefcase balanced on his knees, and he looked at me with the same steady gaze he'd had since the day we met 30 years ago. "Stuart," he said, "in 2 months, Claire is going to regret the day she lied about you. But you need to be patient. Can you do that?" I thought about the year I'd spent in that place, the blocked calls, the returned letters, the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I'd survived to see morning. I thought about my son who'd cut me out of his life because he'd believed a lie, and I thought about Claire who'd smiled at me an hour ago and told me it would all be over soon. "I have been patient for a year," Norman Nye said. "I can wait 2 more months." He nodded, stood, and shook my hand. "Good, because this is going to work. I promise you, it's going to work." After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the narrow window at the parking lot below. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, but something close. A sense that the pieces were finally falling into place, that the endgame was coming. Because while I was planning my return from the dead, Jordan's world was falling apart. While I was preparing for my return, Jordan's world was falling apart. I didn't know it. Then I only learned the details later from Norman's investigation and the bank records Evan extracted. But here's what happened. According to an email Norman showed me later, Jordan received a notice from the bank in early September. The subject line read, "Notice of Loan Default. NBIC, Andropastan, Irajarst." And the message inside was short and brutal. Kensington Development. The company Jordan had built from the ground up, the business he had poured 15 years of his life into, owed the bank $2.7 million. The loan had been secured against his largest real estate project, a mixed-use development on the north side of the city that was supposed to be his breakthrough. But the project had gone sideways. The contractor had gone bankrupt halfway through construction, leaving the site unfinished and unsellable. 3 clients had already filed lawsuits demanding their deposits back, and the bank, which had been patient for 6 months, had decided it was done waiting. Evan later showed me the phone records. Jordan had called the bank that same day. I imagine he was hoping for some leeway, some chance to negotiate, but the conversation didn't go the way he wanted. "I need an extension," Jordan said, his voice tight. "Just 6 months. I can turn this around if you give me time." The banker, a man whose name Evan found in the call logs, though it doesn't matter, now didn't sound sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kensington. The bank has decided to call in the loan immediately. You have 30 days to pay in full, or we'll begin the process of seizing your assets." 30 days, $2.7 million, no room for negotiation. I learned from Evan, who was still watching the house at 156 Thornwood, that Jordan came home that night looking 10 years older. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and he walked through the front door with the kind of expression you see on someone who's just been told the ground beneath them has disappeared. Claire was waiting in the living room. Evan couldn't hear everything they said, but he caught enough through the open window to piece together the conversation. Jordan dropped his briefcase on the couch and ran a hand through his hair. "We're in trouble," he said. "Real trouble." Claire stood up, her face carefully arranged into a mask of concern. "What happened?" "The bank called in the loan. They want $2.7 million in 30 days, or they're going to take everything." Claire's eyes widened, and for a moment I wonder if she was genuinely surprised or if she was just good at pretending. "How much do we need?" she asked. $2.7 million, Jordan said flatly. "And I don't know where to find it." "What about investors?" Claire asked. "You've worked with investors before. Can't you go back to them?" Jordan shook his head. "I've tried. I spent all afternoon making calls. No one wants to touch us right now. Our credit rating is in the basement. The lawsuits have scared everyone off. And the project?" He stopped, his jaw tight. "The project is a disaster. No one's going to throw money at a sinking ship." Claire walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "There has to be someone," she said softly. "Some firm, some fund, someone who can help." Jordan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, There's one firm that might help. Bancroft Capital Partners. They're a private equity fund based downtown, but they're notoriously selective. They only take on projects they think are worth their time, and they have a reputation for being ruthless negotiators. Claire tilted her head. "Try them, honey," she said. "What do you have to lose?" What Jordan didn't know, what Claire didn't tell him, was that she was already running through the implications in her head. Norman found an email she'd sent to Kyle Bennett later that night, time-stamped at 11:43 p.m. "Jordan's company is collapsing," she wrote. "He's desperate. He's weak. This is exactly what I need. Once the company goes under, he'll have nothing left. And when Stewart dies, the inheritance will be the only thing holding us together. I just need to make sure Stewart doesn't last long enough to complicate things." Kyle's reply came an hour later. "Stay calm. Stick to the plan. If Jordan's desperate, he'll make mistakes. Let him." But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to what happened next. Norman traced the email chain between Jordan and Bancroft Capital Partners. Here's what happened. Jordan spent the next 3 days working around the clock, pulling together financial statements, project summaries, and a detailed proposal explaining why Kensington Development was worth saving. He barely slept. Evan told me later that the lights in Jordan's home office stayed on until 3 in the morning, and Claire didn't go in once to check on him. On the third day, Jordan sent the email. The subject line read, "Emergency funding request, Kensington Development." 3 days later, he got a reply. "Dear Mr. Kensington Bancroft Capital Partners has reviewed your proposal. The chairman will meet with you personally. October 15th, 9 a.m., Bancroft Capital Tower, 47th floor." Jordan read the email twice, then leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "They're willing to see me," he said aloud, even though no one was in the room to hear him. "There's still a chance." Claire came into the office a few minutes later. She leaned over his shoulder and read the email, and I can only imagine what went through her mind when she saw the name Bancroft Capital. Evan told me she went very still, and when she finally spoke, her voice was tight. "Bancroft Capital," she said slowly. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Jordan didn't notice the edge in her voice. He was too relieved, too focused on the fact that anyone was willing to give him a shot. "They're one of the biggest private equity firms in the state," he said. "If they agree to help, we'll be fine. Better than fine." Claire nodded, but she didn't say anything else. And that night, according to another email Evan pulled from the cloud backup, she wrote to Kyle again. "Bancroft Capital. I've heard that name before. I need to check something." But she didn't check. Or if she did, she didn't act on what she found. Maybe she convinced herself it was just a coincidence. Maybe she was too focused on the end game to worry about the details. Either way, she didn't warn Jordan. She didn't tell him that Bancroft Capital Partners was the investment firm founded by his father 24 years earlier. She didn't tell him that the man who'd built that firm, the man who controlled $300 million in assets, was the same man she'd locked away in a nursing home and left to die. I only learned all of this afterward. At the time, I was sitting in that narrow room at Meadowbrook, counting down the days until October 15th. Norman had told me the plan. Evan had confirmed that Jordan had taken the bait. And I knew in a way that felt both terrifying and inevitable that the moment I'd been waiting for was finally coming. Jordan thought that meeting would save his company. He had no idea it would shatter everything he'd ever known about his life. He had no idea that his salvation and his reckoning was closer than he thought. Evan kept me updated on Jordan's preparations. My son spent 2 weeks getting ready for that meeting, like his life depended on it, because it did. He hired a financial consultant to polish the numbers. He worked 16-hour days building a pitch deck, 40 slides with graphs and projections and testimonials from past clients. He rehearsed his presentation in front of the mirror, in front of Claire, in front of anyone who would listen. And he researched Bancroft Capital Partners the way a man researches a lifeboat when his ship is going down. What he found was impressive but vague. Bancroft Capital was a private equity fund with over $500 million in assets under management. It had been operating for more than 2 decades, quietly funding real estate developments, tech startups, and infrastructure projects across 3 states. The firm had a reputation for being selective, disciplined, and ruthlessly effective, and at the top of it all was S.K. Bancroft, founder, managing partner, and chairman. There were only 2 photos of S.K. Bancroft available online. Both were old, grainy, taken from a distance at industry conferences. Evan told me that Jordan stared at those photos for a long time. One night his brow furrowed. "Weird," he muttered to himself. "This guy looks kind of familiar." But he didn't recognize me, not yet. Claire, on the other hand, did. Evan had planted a small camera in the home office at 156 Thornwood a week earlier. Nothing fancy, just a cheap webcam tucked behind books on the shelf aimed at Jordan's desk. The camera was installed on a shared device Evan had previously been authorized to maintain. We needed to know if Claire was going to interfere. And on October 10th, 5 days before the meeting, we got our answer. Jordan was at his desk reviewing the pitch deck. Claire came in with coffee, leaned over his shoulder, and looked at the screen. "How's it going?" she asked. "Good," Jordan said. "I think we got a strong case. If Bancroft agrees to fund us, we can turn this around." Claire nodded absently, then paused. "Wait, go back." Jordan clicked back a few slides. There it was, a slide titled About Bancroft Capital Partners, with a brief company history and a photo of S.K. Bancroft standing in front of the Bancroft Capital Tower. Claire stared at the photo. Her hand tightened on the back of Jordan's chair. S.K. Bancroft. "Who is that?" "The chairman," Jordan said. "The guy I'm meeting with next week." "Why?" Claire didn't answer. She turned and walked out of the room, and a few minutes later, Evan's camera picked up the sound of her laptop opening in the bedroom. She typed S.K. Bancroft into Google. She scrolled through images. And then she found a photo from 2010 taken at a charity gala, showing a younger version of me standing beside a city councilman. Claire zoomed in on the photo. Then she pulled up another image, one from an old family album of me in the backyard at 2847 Elm Street. She held the 2 photos side by side on the screen. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." She grabbed her phone and called Kyle. Evan couldn't hear the whole conversation, but he heard enough. "We have a problem," Claire said, her voice tight. "A big problem. Stewart isn't rotting in that nursing home. He's the chairman of Bancroft Capital. He's been the chairman this whole time. How the hell did I miss this?" Kyle's response was muffled, but Claire's next words were clear. "If he tells Jordan the truth, if Jordan finds out I lied about the gambling, about everything, I'm finished. We're finished." She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed staring at the laptop screen. Then she closed the computer and went back to the office, her face carefully blank. "Everything okay?" Jordan asked. "Yeah," Claire said, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine, and she knew it. While Jordan was preparing to save his company, and Claire was preparing to lose everything, I was preparing for something else entirely. Norman had moved me out of Meadowbrook a week earlier in the middle of the night. I'd spent the past 7 days at Norman's apartment, a quiet, comfortable place on the 23rd floor of a building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. It was the first time in over a year that I'd slept in a real bed, eaten a real meal, taken a shower without worrying. On the morning of October 14th, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself for the first time in months. The man staring back was older than I remembered, thinner. His hair was more gray than brown, and there were deep lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but he was clean. And he was wearing a suit, a charcoal gray suit that Norman had picked up from my house at 2847 Elm, along with a white shirt and a burgundy tie. Norman knocked on the door. "You ready for this?" he asked. I adjusted the tie and nodded. "I've been ready for a year." Evan arrived an hour later with a leather briefcase. Inside were 3 folders, one containing the recording of Claire and Kyle plotting my death, one containing the forged power of attorney and the forensic report proving it was fake, and one containing the financial records showing how Claire had drained $50,000 from my accounts. "Everything we need," Evan said. "Tomorrow we show Jordan who she really is." Norman poured 3 glasses of whiskey. We didn't toast. We just drank in silence, each of us thinking about what was coming. Later that night, after Evan and Norman had gone, I stood by the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Jordan was lying awake in bed, running through his pitch one more time. Somewhere out there, Claire was lying awake too, wondering if I was going to destroy her. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice asked if I should warn Jordan. If I should call him, tell him the truth, spare him the shock of walking into that boardroom and seeing his father sitting at the head of the table. But I didn't, because Jordan needed to see it with his own eyes. He needed to feel the shock, the confusion, the betrayal. He needed to realize that he'd abandoned his own father, a father who had more power to help him than anyone else in the world, because he'd believed a lie. Only then would he question everything Claire had told him. Only then would he be ready to hear the truth. October 15th, 9 o'clock in the morning. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Bancroft Capital Tower. That's where it would all come together, the lies, the betrayal, the evidence, the truth. That's where my son would finally see who I really was, and who his wife really was. I walked into that building at 8:45. Jordan arrived at 8:55, clutching his briefcase, his face pale and determined. He stepped into the elevator. He pressed the button for the 47th floor, and he had no idea that in 5 minutes, his entire world would shatter. Before I walk you through what happened in that boardroom, before I reveal the moment that changed everything I need to know, you're still with me. If you've made it this far, if you're ready to see how this unfolds, type, "I'm here," in the comments below. Let me see that you're invested in this story. And please note what comes next. Include some dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, feel free to pause here. But if you're ready, let's step into that boardroom together. October 15th, 2024, 9 o'clock in the morning, the boardroom on the 47th floor of Bancroft Capital Tower. Jordan sat at the conference table, hands folded in front of him, trying to look confident. His briefcase was open beside him. The pitch deck he'd spent 2 weeks perfecting, stacked neatly on the polished wood. The room was large and bright, with glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city below. 2 senior executives from Bancroft Capital sat at the far end of the table, silent and watchful. Norman and Evan stood near the back of the room, their faces carefully neutral. Jordan didn't know they were there for me. He glanced at his watch. 9:02. The chairman was late. Jordan shifted in his seat, ran a hand through his hair, and went over his opening lines one more time in his head. This was his last chance. If Bancroft Capital turned him down, Kensington Development was finished. At 9:05, the door opened. A woman in a gray suit, my assistant, stepped into the room. "Gentlemen," she said. "The chairman." Jordan stood up, smoothing his tie. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared to shake hands with the man who held his future in his hands. And then I walked in. I was wearing a black suit, a white shirt, and a navy tie. My hair was cut short and combed back. I carried a cane, a simple wooden cane with a silver handle necessary, because my arthritis made it hard to walk long distances. But I stood straight. I looked him in the eye, and I watched as the color drained from his face. "Dad," he whispered. I closed the door behind me and walked to the head of the table. I set the cane against the armrest of my chair and sat down. "Hello, Jordan." He stared at me. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the room, at the executives, at Norman, at Evan, as if trying to confirm that what he was seeing was real. Then he looked back at me. "But what are you doing here?" "I work here," I said. "I own this company. I am S.K. Bancroft." Silence. Jordan sank back into his chair. He shook his head slowly. "That's impossible. Your Claire said you were broke. You gambled away your retirement. You're in a nursing home." I said, "until 2 weeks ago." He stared at me. "I don't understand." "I know," I said, "but you will." I gestured to his chair. "Sit down, Jordan. Let's talk about why you're here." He didn't move for a moment. Then slowly he sat. His hands were trembling. "How long?" he asked quietly. How long have I been rich?" I said. 25 years. How long have I been S.K. Bancroft? Since 2000. How long have you known about 5 seconds? Jordan's jaw tightened. Why didn't you tell me? It was the question I'd been expecting, the question I'd spent a year preparing to answer. Because I wanted you to build your own life, I said. I wanted you to earn your own success, to know that everything you accomplished was yours, not mine. I didn't want you to live in my shadow. I didn't want people to look at you and see my money instead of your work. Jordan's eyes flashed. So you lied to me my entire life? No, I said firmly. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference, unlike your wife who told you I was a gambling addict. Jordan flinched. Claire wouldn't... Jordan, I said, cutting him off. There's more you need to hear. He was already sitting, but he leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed defensively. What are you talking about? I nodded to Norman. He stepped forward and placed a folder on the table in front of Jordan. Open it, I said. Jordan looked at the folder like it might explode. Then slowly he reached out and flipped it open. Inside were printouts, emails, bank statements, copies of the forged power of attorney. He scanned the first page, his brow furrowed, then the second, then the third. His face went from confusion to shock to horror. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That, I said, is proof that your wife lied to you. Proof that she forged legal documents to put me in a nursing home. Proof that she drained $50,000 from my accounts. Proof that she's been planning to take everything you have and disappear with another man. Jordan's hands were shaking. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. No, that's Claire wouldn't do that. Or Jordan. I said quietly, I know this is hard to hear, but you need to listen. He shook his head. You're lying. I'm not lying, I said. I leaned forward, my voice steady. I was locked in a nursing home for a year because your wife told you I was a gambler. She forged documents. She canceled my health insurance. She bribed staff to ignore me when I called for help. And she did it because she wanted me out of the way so she could take my money and yours and run. Jordan was breathing hard now, his chest rising and falling like he'd just finished a sprint. I don't believe you, he said, but his voice cracked. Then believe the evidence, I said. I gestured to the folder. It's all there. Bank records, emails, a recording of Claire and her lover planning my death. Jordan's face went pale again. A recording. I nodded to Evan. He pulled out a small speaker, set it on the table, and pressed play. Claire's voice filled the room. Cold, calculating. Talking about making sure I was out of the picture. Talking about how no one would question it if an old sick man died in a nursing home. Talking about divorcing Jordan once I was gone and taking half of everything he had. When the recording ended, the room was silent. Jordan sat there staring at the speaker, his face blank. Then he looked at me. How long have you known? Since May, I said. Evan recorded that conversation in May. We've been gathering evidence ever since. Jordan's hands curled into fists. And you waited until now to tell me? Yes, I said. Because you wouldn't have believed me if I'd told you in September. You would have thought I was lying or desperate or trying to manipulate you. You needed to see it for yourself. You needed to come here to this building asking for my help before you'd be ready to hear the truth. I watched my son struggle to process what was happening. Part of me wanted to pull him into a hug to tell him it was going to be okay. Part of me wanted to scream at him for abandoning me, for believing Claire over me, for leaving me to rot in that place for a year. But I did neither, because this wasn't about emotion. This was about truth. I said quietly, there's more. He looked at me, his face ashen. More? Yes. I paused. But there was one more truth I hadn't told him yet. One that would make everything else pale in comparison. I took a breath and looked at my son. He was still sitting there, staring at the folder on the table, his face pale and drawn. Norman and Evan stood quietly near the back of the room, waiting. The two executives at the far end of the table hadn't moved. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Jordan, I said, does Claire's family name Hughes mean anything to you in relation to my business? He looked up at me, confused. No, he said. Should it? I nodded to Norman. He stepped forward, pulled a remote from his pocket, and clicked a button. The screen on the wall behind me lit up, displaying a scanned document. It was dated March 2009. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Bancroft Capital Partners, investment agreement, Hughes Manufacturing. Jordan squinted at the screen. What is that? An investment contract, I said. In 2009, Claire's father, Gerald Hughes, was on the verge of bankruptcy. His company, Hughes Manufacturing, was drowning in debt. He came to me for help. I invested $8 million and restructured his operations. Hughes Manufacturing exists today because of me. Norman clicked to the next slide. It was a photograph Graney taken at a press conference showing me shaking hands with a man in his late 50s. The caption beneath read SK. Bancroft and Gerald Hughes announced partnership. Jordan stared at the photo. His mouth opened slightly. You saved Claire's family. Yes, I said. And Claire knows. She's known for over a year. Jordan's face went from pale to ashen. What? I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. March 2023, that's when Claire discovered I was S.K. Bancroft. She was at your in-laws' house. Gerald mentioned my name, mentioned that I'd saved his company years ago. Claire put the pieces together. She went home, did her research, and figured out that her father-in-law, the man she'd written off as a broke retiree, was worth $300 million. Jordan shook his head. No, she would have told me. She didn't tell you, I said, cutting him off. Because she had a plan. For 6 months she prepared. She forged documents. She manipulated your family doctor into signing off on a bogus medical evaluation. She fabricated evidence of gambling debts that never existed. And in September 2023, she told you I was a gambler. She lied to you, Jordan, and she did it because she wanted my fortune. Jordan stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, his back to me, his shoulders tense. This can't be real, he said, his voice tight. Evan stepped forward. Mr. Kensington, he said quietly, there's more. He set a small speaker on the table and pressed play. Claire's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. The old man is getting weaker. Once he's gone, Jordan inherits everything. And once we're married long enough, I'll divorce Jordan and take half. Jordan spun around. He stopped, his face stricken. That's Claire's voice. Yes, Evan said. This was recorded in May. Norman clicked to another slide. This one showed an email one Jordan had seen before. The subject line read, Urgent Gambling Debt Notice. The body of the email listed a series of payments supposedly made to online casinos, totaling over $100,000. Edit this email, Norman said, pointing to the screen, was fabricated, created using Photoshop. The bank account numbers are fake. The casinos listed don't exist. Claire manufactured this evidence and showed it to you to convince you that your father was broke and irresponsible. Jordan stared at the screen, his hands curled into fists. No, he said. No, this can't be. Jordan, I said, my voice steady. Listen to me carefully. March 2023. That's when Claire discovered who I was. And for the next 6 months she planned. She lied. She manipulated. And in September 2023, she told you I was a gambler. You've been living a lie for over a year, Jordan. And she knew. She knew the entire time. He turned away from me again, his head bowed. I don't understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would she do this? Because she wanted my money, I said. And she knew that if I told you the truth, her plan would fall apart. Evan opened another folder. He spread the documents across the table. This, he said, pointing to the first one, is the power of attorney Claire used to commit you to Meadowbrook. It's a forgery. Your father never signed it. He pointed to the next document. This is a bank statement showing a $50,000 withdrawal from your father's account. Claire made that withdrawal using the forged POA. He pointed to the last set of papers. And these are medical records from Meadowbrook. They show that your father's arthritis medication was discontinued, that his health insurance was canceled, all on Claire's orders. Jordan walked back to the table. He picked up one of the documents, his hands shaking. She canceled his insurance, he said, his voice cracking. Yes, I said. Evan pressed play on the speaker again. This time, it was a different recording. Claire's voice sharper, more urgent. We need to make sure he's out of the picture, permanently. Another accident, he could fall again, or his condition could take a sudden turn. No one would question it. Jordan dropped the paper. He staggered back a step, then another, and then he sank to his knees, his head in his hands. "Oh, God," he said, his voice breaking. "What have I done?" I stood up. I walked around the table and stopped a few feet away from him. "You abandoned me," I said. My voice was quiet, but every word carried. "You believed a lie without questioning it. You left me to rot in a place where I was neglected, where I fell downstairs, where my own daughter-in-law plotted to end my life. You didn't come to see me. You didn't answer my calls, 20 of them. You sent back my letters, 5 in total. I tried, Jordan. God knows I tried." Jordan looked up at me. His face was wet with tears. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked. "I'm so sorry, Dad." "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't give me back the year I lost. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't undo the damage." He dropped his head again, his shoulders shaking, and for a moment, I just stood there, looking down at my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd tried so hard to protect, and I felt something break inside me. My voice trembled when I spoke again, and I didn't try to stop it. "But you're still my son," I said, "and despite everything, I'm going to help you. Not because you deserve it, but because I'm not Claire. I don't abandon family, even when they abandon me." Jordan looked up at me again, his eyes red and swollen. "Thank you," he whispered. I nodded. I didn't reach out to him. Not yet. Because there was still one more thing he needed to know. One more truth that would cut deeper than all the rest. But there was one more truth I hadn't told him yet, I said quietly. One that cut deeper than Claire's betrayal. And it was about Jordan himself. The 2 executives had left the boardroom. Norman closed the door behind them. It was just the 4 of us now, me, Jordan, Norman, and Evan. The room felt smaller than it had 10 minutes ago, the air heavier like the walls were pressing in. Evan set his laptop on the table and opened a second file. He turned the screen toward Jordan. "There's something else you need to see," he said quietly. Jordan looked at the screen, his face already pale when a shade whiter. It was a screenshot of a browser history, dated April 23, 2024. The search queries were simple damning, S.K. Bancroft net worth. Bancroft Capital Partners founder. Stuart Kensington S.K. Bancroft, same person. Below the search history was a downloaded image, a photo from a charity gala in 2010. Me standing beside a city councilman, the caption beneath reading, S.K. Bancroft, founder of Bancroft Capital Partners, attends annual fundraiser. Evan looked at Jordan. "You searched for this in April 2024, he said. 6 months before this boardroom, you knew." Jordan's hands went to his face. He covered his eyes, his shoulders hunched forward. His voice broke. "I didn't want to believe it." "But you did believe it," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "You knew Claire lied. You knew I wasn't a gambler. You knew I was S.K. Bancroft. And you did nothing." Jordan lowered his hands. His eyes were red swollen. "I found out in April," he said, his voice shaking. "I saw the photo. I Googled your name. I knew Claire had lied, but I couldn't move. Every time I picked up the phone to call you, Claire seemed to sense it. She'd ask, 'What's wrong, honey?' And I'd freeze. She had a way of making me feel like I was losing my mind." He stopped, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and took a breath. "One night end of April, I packed a bag. I was going to drive to that nursing home and bring you home. But Claire walked into the bedroom. She asked where I was going. I said, 'To see Dad.' She just looked at me, and then she started crying. She said, 'If you go, I'm leaving you.' I can't be with someone who chooses a liar over his wife." And his voice cracked. I put the bag down. I didn't say anything. I just watched him, my hands resting on the table, my jaw tight. I told myself, just one more week. Jordan continued, his words tumbling out faster now, like a dam breaking. "Next week I'll go." But next week became next month. And I convinced myself that maybe you were okay, that maybe the nursing home wasn't so bad, that maybe I was overreacting. I was a coward, Dad. I chose comfort over courage. I chose a lie I wanted to believe over a truth I was afraid to face. He looked at me, his face twisted with shame, and every day Claire reinforced it. She'd say, "You're a good man, Jordan. You're not like your father. You don't enable. You don't gamble away your family's future." She rewarded me for abandoning you, and I let it happen because it was easier. The room was silent. Norman and Evan stood near the back, their faces carefully neutral. Jordan sat there trembling, waiting for me to speak. I let the silence stretch, 30 seconds, maybe more. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. I wanted him to sit in it, the way I'd sat in that narrow bed at Meadowbrook, counting the water stains on the ceiling, wondering if anyone in the world still cared whether I lived or died. Finally, I spoke. "You weren't just a coward, Jordan," I said. My voice was low, steady, but every word landed like a stone. "You were complicit. You knew the truth for 6 months. 6 months. While I was lying in that place wondering if I'd ever see sunlight again. While nurses ignored me. While Marcus deliberately left floors wet so I'd fall. While Claire was planning to make sure I never left that building alive. You knew, and you did nothing." Jordan's head dropped. His shoulders shook. He didn't try to defend himself. He just sat there taking it. I leaned forward slightly. "But I also understand what abuse can do to a person's mind," I said. "I've been reading about it since Norman got me out. Gaslighting, coercive control. It's insidious. It makes you doubt reality. It makes you choose your abuser over yourself, over the people you love. It makes you believe that leaving is more dangerous than staying." Jordan looked up at me, his eyes desperate, searching my face for something, forgiveness maybe, or hope. "So I'll say this once," I said, "and only once. I forgive you for being weak, but I will never forget that when I needed you most, you chose her. You chose your fear over my life." Jordan's face crumpled. "Can I," he whispered, "can I ever earn your trust back?" I looked at him for a long moment. My son. The boy I'd raised. The man I'd tried to protect. The man who'd left me to rot because he was too afraid to stand up to his wife. "I don't know," I said. "Ask me in 5 years." Jordan nodded slowly, like he understood that was the best answer he was going to get. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just nodded. I stood up. My joints ached, they always did, after sitting too long, but I didn't reach for my cane right away. I just stood there looking down at him. And then I turned and walked toward the door. Norman opened it for me. Evan followed. Jordan stayed in his seat, his head in his hands. I didn't hug him. I didn't put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't tell him it was going to be okay. Because it wasn't okay. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I walked out of that room without hugging my son. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. Because if I let him in too soon, I'd be opening myself up to new pain. And I'd had enough pain for one lifetime. In the hallway, Norman walked beside me. "That was hard," he said quietly. "Yes," I said, "it was." "Do you think he'll come back from this?" Norman asked. I thought about it. About the look on Jordan's face when Evan showed him the search history. About the way his voice had broken when he'd talked about packing that bag. About the shame in his eyes when he'd asked if he could earn my trust back. "I don't know," I said. "But that's his problem to solve, not mine." We walked to the elevator. Evan pressed the button. The doors opened and we stepped inside. As the elevator descended, I thought about Claire, about Kyle, about the lies they had told and the lives they'd destroyed. And I thought about what Norman had said weeks ago when we'd first started gathering evidence. When we're done, the world will know exactly what kind of people they are. But the reckoning for Claire and Kyle wasn't over. There was one final twist waiting, one that would show the world exactly what kind of people they were. 2 days after the boardroom, Evan came to me with something that shook me to my core. We were sitting in Samuel Hartley's office, a quiet space on the 15th floor of a building downtown, with a mahogany desk walls lined with law books and a window overlooking the city. Norman was there too. Evan set his laptop on the desk and turned it toward me. "I kept digging into Kyle Bennett's past," he said. "And I found something, 3 other cases, 3 other victims." He pulled up a file. The first name on the screen was Margaret Flynn. "Margaret Flynn," Evan said. 72 years old, widow. She had $180,000 in retirement savings. In 2019, Kyle posed as an independent financial advisor. He convinced her to let him manage her portfolio. 6 months later, the money was gone. And 6 months after that, Margaret took her own life. She left a note. It said, "I'm sorry I failed you." I stared at the screen. There was a photo of Margaret, a woman with white hair and kind eyes, smiling at the camera. She looked like someone's grandmother. She looked like someone who trusted the wrong person. Evan clicked to the next file. Thomas Brennan, 68. He owned a small manufacturing company. Kyle convinced him to invest company funds in what he called high-yield ventures. The ventures didn't exist. The company went bankrupt. Thomas lost his home. He's living with his son now in a one-bedroom apartment. He hasn't worked in 3 years. The photo showed a man with gray hair and a tired face standing in front of a factory that no longer belonged to him. Evan clicked again. Helen Parker, 70, widowed school teacher. Her husband died in 2022 and left her $95,000 in life insurance. Kyle approached her at a grief support group. He told her he could help her invest the money. A year later, the account was empty. Helen's living with her daughter now. She can't afford her medications. The photo showed a woman with silver hair and glasses sitting on a porch, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small, fragile. "There's a pattern," Evan said. Kyle targets elderly people who are isolated, widowed, alone, people who have recently come into money retirement, savings life, insurance payouts, inheritances. He gains their trust. He forges documents. He drains their accounts, and then he disappears. I looked at the 3 photos on the screen, Margaret, Thomas, Helen, and I thought about myself, about the year I'd spent at Meadowbrook, about the forged power of attorney, about the $50,000 Claire had taken. I wasn't special, I said quietly. I was just another prey, another old man for him to bleed dry. "Yes," Evan said, "but you had something the others didn't. You had resources. You had me and Uncle Norman, and you had the ability to fight back." Norman leaned forward. According to the National Council on Aging, 1 in 10 older Americans experiences some form of abuse, financial, physical, or emotional. Most cases go unreported. The victims are too ashamed, too scared, or too isolated to ask for help. But you can help them, Stuart. You can make sure Kyle never does this to anyone else. I nodded slowly. "What do we do?" "We go to the FBI," Norman said. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room at the FBI field office. The building was all concrete and security checkpoints. The room was small, windowless, with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. There was a table, 4 chairs, and a recording device in the center. Agent Rebecca Winters walked in. She was 42, with short dark hair, and the kind of steady, no-nonsense demeanor that told you she'd seen worse than anything you were about to tell her. She shook my hand, sat down across from me, and opened a thick folder. "Mr. Kensington," she said, "we've been building a case against Kyle Bennett for 8 months. Your evidence and your nephew's investigation is the final piece we need." She spread a series of documents across the table. Bank records, emails, copies of forged signatures, photos of the 3 victims Evan had shown me, plus 2 others I hadn't seen. "Kyle Bennett is a career criminal," Agent Winters said. "He's been doing this for at least a decade, probably longer. We've identified 5 confirmed victims, including you. We suspect there are more who haven't come forward." "What are the charges?" I asked. Agent Winters pulled out a sheet of paper. "Federal charges, wire fraud, Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. Kyle used electronic communications to defraud you and the other victims. That alone carries up to 20 years. Conspiracy Section 371. Kyle and Claire worked together. That's another 5 years. Aggravated identity theft, Section 1028A. Kyle forged your signature on the power of attorney. That's a mandatory 2-year sentence, consecutive to any other sentence. Healthcare fraud, Section 13. 47. Claire fraudulently canceled your health insurance. That's up to 10 years. She paused. And at the state level, we're pursuing charges of conspiracy to cause serious harm. That covers the incidents at Meadowbrook, the fall down the stairs, the medication being cut off the bribed orderly. I took a slow breath. How long could they get? Kyle's looking at 15 to 25 years in federal prison, Agent Winters said. He's a repeat offender, no chance of early release. Claire's looking at 10 to 18 years. She's an accomplice, but she also forged documents, committed fraud, and participated in the conspiracy to harm you. I looked at the photos of Margaret Thomas and Helen spread across the table. I thought about Margaret's note, "I'm sorry I failed you." I thought about Thomas living in his son's apartment, too depressed to leave the house. I thought about Helen, unable to afford her medications. Margaret died believing her family hated her, I said quietly. Thomas lost everything he built. Helen will never retire in peace. And I almost became victim number 4. Agent Winters nodded. You were lucky, Mr. Kensington. You had resources. You had people who believed you. Most victims don't. "Oh, then what do you need from me?" I asked. "Testimony," she said. "We need you to testify at trial, to tell the jury what Kyle and Claire did to you, to show them that this wasn't just one isolated incident, it was part of a pattern." I didn't hesitate. "I'll testify. Whatever you need. These people deserve justice." Agent Winters closed the folder. "The trial's set for April 2025, 6 months from now. We'll be in touch." I shook her hand and left the building. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, and the sun was setting behind the downtown skyline. Norman and Evan were waiting by the car. "How do you feel?" Norman asked. "Tired," I said, "but ready." The trial was set for 6 months later, April 2025. But before that, I had one more thing to do. I needed to face my son again. I hadn't spoken to Jordan in 2 weeks, not since the boardroom, not since I'd learned he'd known the truth and stayed silent. Evan had been the one to arrange this meeting. He'd called me 3 days ago and said, "Jordan wants to see you. He's been asking every day. I think he's ready to listen." I'd told Evan I'd think about it, and I had. For 3 long days, I'd thought about whether I wanted to see my son again, whether I could. In the end, I said yes. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed to know if there was anything left worth saving. We agreed to meet at Cornerstone Coffee, a small place on the edge of town, far from Bancroft Capitol Tower, and far from the house at 156 Thornwood. Cornerstone was neutral territory, a cozy spot with wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and a window that looked out onto a quiet street. It smelled like fresh coffee and baked goods, and the morning sunlight streamed through the glass in pale, clean lines. Jordan arrived early. He had been sitting there since 8:45, 20 minutes before I was supposed to show up. He'd ordered 2 black coffees, one for himself, one for me. He still remembered how I took it. No cream, no sugar. I walked in at 9 o'clock. Jordan stood up as soon as he saw me. For a moment, he looked like he was going to step forward, maybe to shake my hand or hug me. But he didn't. He hesitated, then sat back down. I walked to the table and sat across from him. The silence between us was thick, awkward, heavy, with everything we hadn't said. Finally, I broke it. "You wanted to talk," I said. "So talk." Jordan looked down at his coffee, his fingers wrapped tightly around the cup. "I don't know where to start, Dad," he said quietly. "Saying I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it." No, I said, "It doesn't." He flinched, but he didn't look away. "I've been thinking about what you said at the boardroom, about how I was complicit, about how I chose Claire over you." His voice cracked. "You were right. I did, and I don't know how to make that right." I leaned back in my chair and looked at him, my son, 35 years old, thinner than he'd been a month ago, with dark circles under his eyes and a kind of brokenness in his posture that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking a lot about this," I said, "about whether I even want you in my life, and the truth is I don't know yet, but I'm willing to try, on my terms." Jordan's eyes met mine. "What terms?" I took a sip of my coffee. "4 conditions," I said. "If you can't meet them, then this is the last time we'll sit across from each other." Jordan nodded. "I'm listening." "First," I said, "you don't get to blame everything on Claire. Yes, she lied. Yes, she manipulated you. But you made a choice, Jordan. You knew I was in a nursing home and you didn't come. That was your choice. Own it." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Okay, I own it." "Second," I continued. You need professional help. You were in an abusive relationship. Claire used gaslighting, coercive control tactics that made you doubt your own mind. You need to understand why that happened so it never happens again. I've already started, Jordan said. Twice a week. Evan knows. I nodded. Good, keep doing that. Third, I said, and my voice got quieter, harder. I'm not coming to your house. I'm not doing holidays with you. Not for a long time. Maybe never. You're going to have to earn back every bit of trust you lost. And that's going to take years, Jordan. Years. If it even happens at all. Jordan's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. I understand. Basic. I said, and this is the most important one, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me, because I need to know I gave you a chance. But if you mess up again, if you lie to me, if you hide anything from me, if I find out you've been in contact with Claire or Kyle, I'm gone. For good. No second chances. Do you understand? Jordan wiped his face with the back of his hand. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes, Dad. Whatever it takes. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, here's what we're going to do. We'll meet here once a month. Just coffee, no expectations. We'll talk. We'll see where it goes. And if at any point I feel like this isn't working, I walk away. No arguments, I just walk. Jordan nodded quickly. Once a month, I can do that. Good, I said. I picked up my coffee and took another sip. Jordan did the same, and we sat there drinking in silence. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't warm, but it was a start. Jordan and I stood up at the same time. For a moment I thought he might reach out to hug me, but he didn't. He just nodded, and I nodded back. Thank you for giving me a chance, he said. Don't thank me yet, I said. Prove it. He nodded again, picked up his jacket, and walked out of the coffee. I stayed for a few more minutes, finishing my coffee, watching the street outside. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's not a switch you flip or a decision you make once and then it's done. It's a process. It's a choice you make every single day to try again, to hold the door open just a crack, to see if the other person is willing to walk through it. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the table, and walked out into the November cold. The trial was still 6 months away. Jordan and I had a long road ahead. But for the first time in a year, I felt like maybe it was a road worth traveling. It had been 6 months since the trial ended. 6 months since the courtroom doors closed on Claire Hughes and Kyle Bennett. 6 months since I sat on the witness stand and told a federal judge exactly what they had done to me, and to Margaret Flynn, to Thomas Brennan, to Helen Parker. Claire received 12 years in federal prison. No parole possibility for the first 8. The judge called her actions deliberate, calculated elder abuse compounded by manipulation and deception. Jordan had already filed for divorce. The papers were signed 2 weeks after the verdict. Kyle Bennett got 18 years, wire fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, conspiracy to cause serious harm. Both defendants waived a jury trial and accepted expedited federal proceedings, which brought sentencing within 6 months. The judge cited Margaret Flynn by name 3 times during sentencing. Kyle is also facing 3 separate civil suits filed by the families of his victims. He will never walk free with money in his pocket again. Norman Blake retired fully 3 months ago. He and his wife bought an RV and have been traveling the Southwest. He still calls me every Sunday for chess over video chat. Evan Kensington was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Investments at Bancroft Capital. I trust him more than anyone else in the company. He is considering law school next year. I told him I would pay for it. Maggie O'Brien left Meadowbrook the week after the FBI investigation began. The facility was shut down by the state health department 2 months later. Maggie now works at a high-end senior care facility on the north side of the city. I donated $500,000 to their capital improvement fund in Margaret Flynn's name. Jordan sold 30% of his shares in Kensington Development to repay the bridge loan I gave him. He is still restructuring the company, still attending weekly therapy sessions, still living in a modest apartment across town. I moved out of Norman's apartment 4 months ago. I bought a smaller house on Riverside Drive. Quiet street, old trees, a porch with a rocking chair. I founded the Margaret Flynn Fund for Elder Financial Protection. It provides free legal aid and financial counseling to seniors who have been exploited. Forgiveness is not what I thought it was. It is not a moment. It is not a hug. Forgiveness is a decision you make every single day to stop letting the past consume you. It is choosing to move forward, not because you have forgotten, but because you refuse to let someone else's cruelty define the rest of your life. I have forgiven Jordan not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace. The first Saturday of October, I drove to Cornerstone Coffee. It was our 6th consecutive meeting once a month, same time, same place. Jordan was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. Black coffee, no sugar. We talked about the fund, about his company, about therapy. After a few minutes, Jordan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. He slid it across the table. Inside was a wristwatch, simple silver, elegant. On the back, engraved in small letters, were the words, "Time will heal. Jay." "I know it does not fix anything," he said quietly, "but I wanted you to have something that reminded you that we are still here, that we are still trying." I ran my thumb over the engraving. "Thank you," I said. When we stood to leave, Jordan hesitated, then looked at me. "Dad," he said, "thank you for giving me a chance." It was the first time he had called me that in over 2 years. "You are welcome," I said. Then after a pause, "Son." We walked out of the coffee together. At the door, we went our separate ways. I did not look back. I knew he was trying. That was enough for now. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the river. I thought about Margaret Flynn. I thought about Thomas Brennan and Helen Parker. I thought about all the people who did not survive what I survived. Forgiveness is not a door that swings open once and stays that way forever. It is a door you have to keep opening day after day, moment by moment. Some days it is easy. Some days it is the hardest thing in the world. But you keep opening it, not because the person on the other side deserves it, but because you deserve to stop guarding the door. I chose to survive. I chose to fight. I chose to forgive on my terms in my time with my boundaries firmly in place. I chose to open the door. The next morning, I put the watch on my wrist. It was lighter than I expected. Time will heal. Not because time erases anything, but because time gives you the distance to see things clearly, to choose forgiveness not as a gift to someone else, but as a gift to yourself. I am still here. I am still standing. And that after everything is something worth celebrating. If you've made it to the end of my story, I want to leave you with something important. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself with warnings or red flags. It walks in quietly, wearing the face of someone you trust. It speaks in soft voices and caring gestures. And by the time you see it for what it has already taken everything. I spent a year of my life trapped in a place where no one believed me, where my own son thought I was a liar, where the woman who smiled at my hospital bed was plotting my death. Family betrayal doesn't just steal your money or your freedom, it steals your sense of safety in the world. And that I've learned is the hardest thing to rebuild. But here's what I want you to take away from my family story. Don't wait until it's too late to ask questions. Don't assume that love alone will protect you from manipulation. And for God's sake, don't ignore the warning signs just because they come from someone you care about. I ignored mine, I trusted blindly, and I paid a price I wouldn't wish on anyone. This is my family story, messy, painful, and far from a fairy tale ending. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just gives you the strength to stop carrying it. I chose to forgive Jordan, not because he earned it, but because I refused to let bitterness define the rest of my life. That was my choice. Yours might be different, and that's okay. Every family story has its own lessons. Mine taught me that survival isn't enough. You have to decide who you want to be after the damage is done. If this resonated with you, or if you've lived through your own family betrayal, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for staying with me until the end. One final note. The stories you'll hear on this channel may contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to explore something else that resonates more deeply. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you deserve better than silence.